Professor Ginorio. Take it away.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Folks, it is wonderful to be back with the Reagan Republicans again. Last year we talked about Iran. That didn't end up being topical at all, given the last year. And I'll just spend a moment there since I bent your ear for almost an hour last year about it. I am hopeful that whatever happens, the regime in Iran that is hungry to usher in the millennium by nuking Israel will be overthrown. They have had opportunity after opportunity to make peace with the president, and it is not in their nature. So we'll see what happens, but my hope is it doesn't have to be the son of the Shah, but a genuine Iranian government rather than a bunch of millenarian Islamic fanatics is able to take over that great and ancient land. As to the abortion question, look at the figures. I believe that if you combine the death tolls of Hitler, Stalin, Mao, it doesn't come close to what the United States has done to the unborn since Roe v. Wade back in 1972. And that is a horror on us. So good luck to you. China is the great other right now. It is the antagonist. It does what the Soviets did during the Cold War, what Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan did during the Second World War, what Imperial Germany did during the First World War. It is it sees itself as a rising power, eager, not just ready, eager to seize global leadership from the United States and from the West. And while some of you no doubt have expertise on China and East Asian civilizations, most Americans don't. So I want to today talk about some of the things that makes China different from us. See, there's this blithe Western notion that we all are the same, that we all want the same things under the skin. Human beings are human beings. No. With respect to the idealism of that idea, no. We don't. Culture matters. Culture is why the Iranians are intransigent and will always be intransigent, at least this group of Iranians. And culture is why China has a fundamentally different way of looking at the world, certainly than the young United States. So the principle that I'm going to use to talk about this difference, thank you, I should have done it, is political or cultural inoculation. When inoculation was first done in medicine, if you want to prevent your body from catching a disease out of control, we learned to take little bits of that disease and inject ourselves with live viruses, and our body would learn to fight it. Our antibodies, our white blood cells would learn to fight it, and we would be resistant when we actually encountered the disease in reality. Well, politically and culturally, societies do this too. The most famous example is Germany in 1933, January of. The leaders of Germany, both Field Marshal von Hindenburg and the German army on the one hand, and the Weimar Republic on the other hand, were desperately afraid that with the global depression, Bolshevism, red communism, would come to Germany. So their problem is, how do we inoculate Germany from Soviet communism, from communist socialism? And the answer was to embrace National Socialism. A little National Socialism would inoculate Germany from the desire to have communist socialism. So they invited the former painter Austrian corporal to be the Reichschancellor, and 6 weeks later the Reichstag burned and he took dictatorial power. Did not know who they were messing with. The German elites thought they could control Hitler. They thought they could inoculate Germany with National Socialism. Didn't quite work out the way they wanted. Well, China has a similar impulse. And to understand this impulse, you've got to understand what China was and what China still is. This fixed idea that they are still passionate about, even if they're ignorant around the details. In the time of the Punic Wars and of Alexander the Great's conquest several hundred years before Christ, The river valleys of the Yangtze and Huanghe that make up the ancient civilization of China were a lot like Europe. They had different ethnic groups. They had different dialects or even languages. They had different kingdoms that had been around for hundreds of years. This was called the Warring States period. And it was during this period that the great philosopher Confucius or Confucius came and gave China its fundamental set of ideas. But to end this Warring States period, which was characterized by competing kingdoms, but there's also an ancient cultural thing that you should understand. When you're bad, your mom makes you feel guilty. It's a superpower that moms have. Some of you have used it mercilessly against your children to their benefit. These Eastern civilizations that base themselves on China don't use private guilt. They use public shame. Closest we come to that is putting people in the stocks in pilgrim times. Public humiliation and public shame is the social control in Asian civilizations, East Asian civilizations, that is equivalent to our Western making somebody feel guilty, giving somebody a guilt trip. So that alone indicates a savagery in these Chinese kingdoms, which would be surprising to most Europeans. But around 200 years before Christ, Shih Huang-ti, the first sovereign emperor of an imperial China, took over all of the warring states. He conquered the entire region. And he formed what was called Zhengguo, the Middle Kingdom. The Chinese call it the central flowery of culture. Imagine that all of human civilization is a great pizza, but the center of that pizza is Zhengguo, the Middle Kingdom, China. And that's how it was. The empire founded by this guy, Shih Huang-ti, is the role model for Korea, Japan, to an extent the Philippines, Vietnam. How does China become the central civilization in that entire region of the world? It unifies. And the way they unify, and I have to apologize as you're eating, the way they unify is almost unique in human history. The Qin army, when it conquered a region, killed all the men. They then forced the women for the next 6 months to be intimate with the soldiers. Every child born from that point would be mixed blood, whatever their native was, ethnic group was, and Han Chinese. And the Han Chinese genotype becomes universal through this militarized rape. The sovereign emperor of China, Shih Huang-ti, adopted a philosophy called legalism. Legalism will be familiar to you if you've studied the Jacobins or the communists or the Nazis. It's totalitarian. For everything in life, there should be a law, and the government will enforce that law. You are accountable to the law that the government establishes. So there is nothing for private people to decide, because under the first sovereign emperor of China, everything is regulated, everything is organized. Again, Brezhnev would not have been unhappy in ancient China, and Shih Huang-ti was Mao Zedong's role model. So you have a unified empire through horror, made ethnically unified, common language established, laws about everything, laws for everything, and this guy, the first emperor, unifies a bunch of different countries like that. So, now what? Well, he dies. He's immortal. Thank God we have mortality. Otherwise, some of the most horrible people on earth would just keep on ruling. For his death, to give you a sense of the man, the inner man, at a place called Xian, he has an artificial mountain built in what otherwise is a flat land. It's not a pyramid, it's an artificial mountain. They build sort of like a pyramid structure and cover it with earth and grass and bushes and trees. And under that artificial mountain is a terracotta army of thousands of soldiers that you may have seen in National Geographic before it went commie. And these beautiful individual soldier statues, no two are perfectly alike. And this army would guard him and guide him into the afterlife. This is not a man who was very compassionate. He was not a man who was very empathetic, but he made China strong. And just as the Russians, thanks to 200 years of Mongol rule, always respect strength, raw power, in China, the central authority is supposed to have strength, raw power. And if it doesn't, the rulers, the sub-rulers of China have contempt for it. So after Shi Huang-ti, his dynasty, which is what China is named after, Qin, China, is replaced by basically the Chinese version of the Roman Empire called the Han Dynasty. And from about 250 years before Christ until about 250 years after Christ, these Han have a much different approach to central power. Oh, no, they won't put up with rebellion, not at all. But the Han abandon legalism, and they adopt Confucius's ideas. And Confucius's ideas have the power in Eastern civilization that Christ's ideas have in Western civilization. Confucius was not religious, he was philosophical. But just as Jesus Christ and the Christian faith is the central concept of the West, at the very least from the Emperor Constantine's time to now, as much as people are trying to de-Christianize our society, they're failing. They're failing. The central idea in traditional Chinese culture before the communists took over in 1949 was Confucianism. And again, all of this is about telling you what China thinks of itself. I'm still doing that. And then I'll talk about the attempts to keep China from becoming a pawn of the West, which is how they see it. So let's look at some of the differences between China and the West. In the West, kings rule for all the time that we have monarchies. In China, the emperor doesn't rule. A group of bureaucrats who are trained in the philosophy of Confucius run day-to-day government affairs. They're called Mandarins. It's where the Mandarin orange gets its name. In Chinese, they're called Shih. And these guys can come from the lowest to the highest levels of society. If you are male, and if you take a test on Confucian philosophy, you get hired by the government if you score well. So the smartest people from all classes in China become these mandarins, and they are specialists in running the country. The job of the emperor is a lot like the job of the Pope in Roman Catholic Christianity. It's to be the fulcrum, the joining point between the world of the gods and the world of man. The Chinese emperor is called the Son of Heaven. And like a surfer riding a gnarly wave, dude, and I've never ridden a surfboard in my life. I'm from Maine and New York, not California. But like a surfer is supposed to ride a board, anticipating the various forces of wind and wave that are going to play on him being balanced. The Emperor of China is supposed to have an understanding of the ever-changing balances of cosmic elemental forces. And the job of the Emperor of China is to balance the Chinese Empire like a surfboard in harmony with those forces moment by moment. It's a religious more than it is a political job. Now, some emperors are strong enough to do political things too. Most are not. The Mandarins, the Shih, they run the show. The emperor is there symbolically. So how do you tell if an emperor does a bad job? Natural disasters, earthquakes, tidal waves, plagues, famines, wars. In other words, when the Democrats blamed George W. Bush for Hurricane Katrina smashing into an unprepared New Orleans back in 2006, I think it was, 6, 7, most Americans who were thoughtful thought this is nonsense. You know, you can blame George W. for a bunch of things. You can't blame him for a freaking hurricane. But in China, blaming the emperor for things like that, that's a sign nature is crying out, this man is not in balance, get rid of him. So the emperor's job is sort of a cosmic job. They're run by bureaucrats, whereas in Europe you have different dynasties directly in control. What else is different? Well, the great reason to leave your home and go do great things in the world in our society are God, glory, and gold. This is where the explorers left Europe. They left for God, to spread the word of Jesus Christ, for glory, to be remembered. And of course, you know, getting stinking rich isn't a bad thing either. In China, in Confucian society, God is balance. It's not a personality like Jesus telling you to be true to a bunch of concepts that the world doesn't like. You are supposed to fit in. In China and in East Asia, throughout East Asia, your personal name doesn't come first. Your family name does. I would be Ginorio Ralph in the most simple way, because the real being ain't me. The real being is my family. And so the family comes first. The family is the organism. The individual is a subset of that organism. The individual is not as important as the family. Glory in the West is distinction, individual achievement. You do things the people around you don't do. You're special. Well, in Confucian China, for thousands of years, glory is saving face. Imagine carrying around a giant goldfish bowl every time you get up and leave the house. And if you slosh the water or stun the fish or trip and fall or break the goldfish bowl, your family honor loses face. And not just the living will all be shamed by your failure to maintain the family honor. Your deceased honored dead, who you respect and venerate in the family temple, will also hear of it. In other words, your grandmother, who's now in the afterlife, will be shamed by the other little old ladies because you were dishonorable. So in the West, the individual is encouraged to be bold, because that's how we distinguish ourselves. But in traditional East Asian society, the individual is supposed to conform, to read the room. This is all stuff communism's going to destroy, but you should understand where it's coming from. And gold, for us, gold is an individual reward. We spend it as we like. I want a jet ski. Gold in China is a family resource. There was a movie about an East European painter who comes to Baltimore, and his family is bringing people over, and they have a family fund. And the family fund is something that everyone in the family contributes to, and the family decides how the family fund is going to be spent. Well, that's how it is all the time for everything in traditional China. You earn money, that ain't yours. You earn money, that is the family's. Your job is to earn for the family. And if the emperor is doing everything, all of this will work harmoniously, and he will be seen to have the mandate of heaven. He rules from a special heaven-like place called the Forbidden City. He wears a shade of yellow no one else can wear. He uses a shade of vermilion red ink that nobody else can use. He wears styles of clothing and eats types of foods that nobody else can, because his job is semi-religious, and the clothing and the food and all of it is designed to give him a godlike lifestyle so that he can perceive things. Now, before we go on, you'll notice that I double name everything in here. For example, right below under section 3, it says Zhengguo and then Zhangguo. That's because there are basically two ways that you translate Chinese into English. The older form, which I have first, is called Wade-Giles. Wade-Giles was developed by English speakers who learned Chinese in the south of China. So Wade-Giles tends to focus on pronunciations more common near Hong Kong than Beijing, and it's got an English speaker's sensibility. It's very complicated. In the 1970s, the communists promulgate a system called Pinyin. Pinyin is the system most people use today. If you see words with lots of X's and Z's, that's Pinyin. If you see words that have a lot of TS's and HSI's, then that's Wade-Giles. Taiwan, Free China, the Republic of China, uses Wade-Giles. As a matter of principle, I try to as well. but I also throw in the pinyin. But you're going to see a number of names doubled, and you'll see how different and how similar they are, because truly Chinese is an alien language. They did brain studies of people who never learned to read and people who learned to read in a variety of languages. I had friends who had family who were illiterate. They were wonderful people. They were brilliant in their own way, but they couldn't read. Their brain stores and shuffles information fundamentally different than mine, who learned to read and write in a phonetic letter system like English. Well, my best friend's wife is from China. She got here just before Tiananmen Square. Her father's family were generals in Chiang Kai-shek's army. Her mother's family were Chinese Christians. That's two strikes against those families. It's a miracle they survived what I'm about to tell you about the Cultural Revolution. I've known her since 1990. She's an alien to me, and I'm an alien to her. Because the fundamental way that your brain handles information when you learn a word character language like Chinese is just different from our mix and match block letter system that we have. So there is that disconnect as well between Eastern and Western civilization. Another is Christianity versus Confucianism. Now, from the time of the Han, around 200 AD, to the time of the 1850s, China goes through a long history that I'm not going to go into now. There are a bunch of different dynasties, empires rise, empires fall. But always there is Zhengguo. Always there is China, the Middle Kingdom, the center of Asia. Always. The way the Chinese deal with barbarians is different from ours. In ancient Greece, just after the Trojan War, the real Trojan War, a group of barbarians called the Dorians come in. They wipe out civilization. There's a dark age for 400 years. People forget how civilization works. They forget the skills and habits. In around the year 475, Western Roman Empire falls to the Goths and Germanic barbarians. And except for the Roman Catholic Church, the Western Christian Church, the Latin Rite Church, civilization also comes close to dying in Western Europe. There's a dark age. In the West, if barbarians overcome us, we have a dark age and we build up from scratch. Chinese don't do that. The Chinese have been conquered a number of times by barbarians, by the Manchus, before them by the Mongols. They absorb them. Barbarians come in, they take over Chinese cities, but instead of acting like a piggy bank, Humpty Dumpty-fying itself on the floor, what China does is the barbarians come in, they eat the food, they wear the silks, they meet the ladies, they eat the spices, and the grandchildren of the conquerors of China are Chinese in thought, word, and deed. It happened, Genghis Khan conquers China in the 1200s and tells his people, don't live in those cities, don't live like Chinese, you'll lose your soul. Well, his grandson Kublai Khan lived in a pleasure palace, wore Chinese robes, spoke Mongol as well as Chinese. Basically, China absorbs the barbarians. That's what they do. So what all of this should mean is this. Before 1850, China is self-consciously the center of the known world, the example to all the other cultures, and a culture that's so strong that we can absorb anything that comes at us. That's the self-image. But in the 1800s, they made industrial Britain and industrial Europe. And that's a quantum leap ahead of anything China has done itself. So one of the first indications of this is China wouldn't allow anyone to trade in China unless they paid silver. And the British were they were hemorrhaging sterling silver. So some brilliant guy in the British East India Company decides, you know, we've got opium. We get it from North India and Pakistan and the borders of Afghanistan. So if we import opium into China through a black market, we'll be able to trade for Chinese goods and not hemorrhage silver. Well, the Chinese imperial government didn't like that. So around 1838-39, they sent a governor down to Canton, which is the Chinese city nearest to where Hong Kong's going to build, And this governor, Lin Se-tsu, burned all the opium that he could find. He captured all the opium, put it on the dock facing where the foreigners lived, and lit it all on fire. Well, war followed. And as powerful as the Chinese thought they were meeting British naval forces, which included a paddle-wheeled steamer. They were meeting modern artillery. They were meeting the ancestors of cartridge firearms. The Chinese were smacked around. This begins what the communists teach their children and the nationalists teach their children is the century of shame. From the 1839 to 42 Opium War to the communist takeover in 1949. For 100 years, the Chinese Empire is weak. And soon, everyone who's anyone goes to China and smacks the Chinese around and gets a port city or two that they can control, and they get extraterritorial legal status, which means you can't be charged in a Chinese court for committing a crime within China. The British famously had a park that they built in the British legation in Shanghai that said no dogs or Chinamen allowed. And the Western world was thinking about dividing China up. The Americans stopped it. We get no credit for it in Chinese history, but we have, under Teddy Roosevelt, a concept called the open door policy. And Roosevelt's idea was, no, don't carve up China like a Thanksgiving turkey. Instead, let's all go in with our missionaries, with our railroads, with our mines, and we will all be able to exploit China equally well everywhere. And we can spread the word of Christ, and we can encourage Chinese to join the modern world. There's an idealism about America regarding China that's there for a very, very, very long time. Well, Chinese nationalists and Chinese communists hate this century of shame. The most known event of it is the Boxer Rebellion, where in the year 1900, a group of Chinese martial arts masters, who Europeans called boxers, the Society of Righteous Fists and so on their own, without the Empress's knowledge, wink, wink, nod, nod, the Empress was behind it, try attacking European forces. And there's a wonderful Bruce Lee movie from the 1970s, a Chopsaki Hong Kong karate movie, where you have martial artists fighting European soldiers and winning. Well, that's a movie. You have righteous fists and very strong abs versus bullets, and bullets win. So, Boxer Rebellion, China's weak. Now, it's during this time that the Taiping appear. The Taiping, it begins around 1850, and it's a result of Baptist missionaries in China. And what the patriotic Chinese come up with is, if we're Christian, we can be Western. If we're Christian and Western, we won't be weak. We'll be strong. They'll have to view us as equals. We will inoculate ourselves against the West with Christianity. So a guy named Hong, H-O-N-G, establishes the Taiping. He calls himself Jesus Christ's younger brother. He calls himself basically an incarnation for China. There are stories at the end of the Gospels that talk about Jesus doing other things and going other places. The Church of Latter-day Saints has a lot to say about that. Well, Master Hong says, I am basically the way and the truth and the life. And he raises huge amounts of interest among the Chinese peasants and among the Chinese urban populations. And soon the Taiping are taking over entire provinces of the empire. This is the biggest threat ever to the imperial power since the Mongol conquests. In case you're wondering where we are, we're on item 4C, Hung Sichuan. When the Westerners hear about this rebellion against the corrupt Chinese empire that's Christian, most Westerners who learn about this are like, yeah, that'll be great. China almost went Roman Catholic in the mid-1600s. There was an emperor who was befriended by Jesuits named the Kangxi Emperor, and he until he found out about the Pope, he wanted to become a Catholic. because he's the Son of Heaven, he expected to be the Pope. And he offered the Catholics, make me Pope and I'll become Catholic and so will China. And they didn't go for it. They thought about it, but they said, no, sorry, we've got a Pope. And so he kicked all the foreigners out of China. That had happened. So there's this rebellion, and the Westerners are sympathetic to it until it comes to Shanghai, which is a major Western area. It's a big city in China. It's like New York City for China. And Hong's people start attacking everyone. And they also start purging everyone, just like if human beings were bushes, cutting them into topiaries, little animals. Here's an elephant. Here's a crab. Here's a teddy bear. Chop, 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 chop. And you do it by cutting away all the rest. Or a bonsai tree. It's a Japanese art. You have a tree and you clip, 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 and you make it into an artistic form. Well, Hong's people, the Taiping, were doing that with human beings. Anyone who didn't fit the ideology was killed, was purged. Tens of millions of people were killed, not in Shanghai alone, but across China. And when the Europeans discovered that in the name of this Jesus Christ's younger brother, anyone who put a word wrong, put a foot wrong, just reacted in the old way was going to be killed and tortured, killed, the Westerners finally said, no, we can't support this. We've got to help the empire. So in the late 1800s, Western army after Western army goes into China working for the emperor and the empress to stop the Taiping. You're all old enough to remember Africanized killer bees in the 1970s. This hybrid group that was going to be more aggressive, and there was a movie called The Swarm. It was this horror movie where people got killed by Africanized killer bees. Well, Africanized killer bees are a hybrid. You take two things that are different and smush them together and you end up with something maybe stronger or worse. So you have the worst elements of somebody's mistaken idea about Christianity and the worst elements of what they see is Western imperialism, Western culture, and Chinese culture, which is violent anyway, and you put it all together and you get the Taiping. You get people who are trying to murder their way to paradise. Well, the Taiping are finally stopped. But China's not done with trying to inoculate itself with a Western idea against the West. And from the late 1800s through World War I and the 1920s, the Chinese, another group of nationalists, come up with communism. See, communism's a Western idea, and if we become communists, then we'll be able to stand up to the West, and they'll have to treat us like equals, because communism comes from the West. And you end up with Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party. And for a while, Stalin doesn't even support them. He supports the Chinese nationalists, the Kuomintang, which is another Western idea. The Chinese nationalists import the idea of nationalism. They're a bit like fascists in Italy. They're a bit like phalangists in Spain. They're a little bit like National Socialists in Germany. The Chinese Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, is not necessarily democratic or Republican in the American sense, not at all. But Stalin says, we'll trust the nationalists, not the communists. The communists end up going on a long march, thousands of miles, and basically it purges weakness from the Communist Party. The communists make a big deal about standing up to the Japanese when they invaded China in 1931 in the north, and then in 1937 all along the coast. The Communist Party sat that one out. They did practically nothing against the Japanese. The nationalists fought the Japanese before we got involved in the war and after Pearl Harbor. But after the war, communism was supported by Stalin, and communists took over China. And in 1949, October of, the Chinese Communist Party takes over the mainland. Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists, his enemy, flees to the island of Taiwan, and Taiwan is still free China today. When Chiang dies in the 1970s, Taiwan becomes a multi-party democracy. The Chinese Communist Party makes a huge deal. Communism is incompatible with Chinese culture. No, Taiwan proves that communism is not necessary. The Chinese can certainly embrace real democracy, votes, elections that matter, politicians. Where am I on time? 15 minutes left? Okay, I won't go over, I promise. But Mao is not happy being in charge of China. He wants to do more. Just like Stalin wasn't happy being in charge of communist Russia. He wanted to do more. Well, Stalin forcibly collectivizes in 1929 and causes the Ukrainian famine in 1930. And Stalin then causes industry to come under a 5-year plan. And he basically grabs the reins of everything. And he uses legalism in the form of communism to take over everyone's life in Soviet Russia. Hell on earth. That's what Mao wants to do. And in the late 1950s, about 10 years after the takeover of China, about 8 years after the Korean War ends, Mao thinks he's strong enough. So he initiates a process called the Great Leap Forward. And in the Great Leap Forward, agriculture is going to be communized, and it's going to be run by people who are specialists from universities, and the farmers are all going to work together under the direction of the educated agronomists. And at the same time, Mao wants to catch up to Britain in terms of steel and iron production. So everyone in China has to take their metal tools, like their hoes, their rakes, their scissors, and melt them in a backyard furnace to make pig iron. So you're collectivizing agriculture, destroying the wisdom that farmers have about growing food, and having them destroy the very tools they use to grow the food, all at the same time. Nobody knows what's going on, but nobody's going to question it, because if they do, that's what Mao wants. Well, that starts in 58. By 62, the rest of the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party stands up to Mao, which is something they don't normally do. Chinese communists have a system called self-criticism. Once a week, they have to write a self-criticism of their thought crimes and give it to their boss. The only one that doesn't have to do this is Mao. Everyone else does. And what you're doing, you're not allowed to say, didn't have any wrong thought this week. No. You have to admit to thought crime and maybe actual crime, and this way they own you. And so nobody usually stands up to Mao because he has all the dirt on everyone. They stand up to him and they say, we're losing too many people. And Mao says, this is China. If we've got anything to lose, it's people. And they say, no, we've got to stop. So Mao is forced to stop unless the rest of the communist leadership is going to overthrow him. But he doesn't forget. He does not forget. He's going to... And 3 years later, 1965, a political crisis comes that allows Mao to unleash the Red Guards. Now, who are the Red Guards? Imagine the least suitable group of people in an entire society to give the power of life and death to. 12-year-olds. Middle school students are given AK-47 Kalashnikov assault rifles, carbines, and they are given the power of life and death over everyone else in society, and their truth is a little red book of Mao Zedong thought, of Mao's ideas. So you have adolescents go to every village, every town, and every city neighborhood in the People's Republic of China, and anyone who doesn't fit their definition, literal definition of Mao's little red book truth is put on trial, a show trial, a public trial. They're forced to wear dunce hats with their crimes written on them in their own hand or somebody else's. Teachers were a big target. Anyone with glasses because they look intellectual, big target. Anyone who had foreign knowledge, big target. And what these Red Guards would chant, and you see an English version of the song on side 2 about halfway here, the flag dance and the Red Guard revolutionary song, section 6, item B5. Revolution is innocent. Rebellion is justified. The revolutionary students and teachers come together, or people come together, different translations, concentrate firepower upon the gangsters, and the Cultural Revolution becomes the leader. Revolution is innocent. Rebellion is justified. Come with me if you want a revolution. If you don't want a revolution, get the fuck out. Their words, not mine. These kids put people on trial. It was a people's court in that there was no law. People were beaten and brutalized in front of cheering crowds of their family members and their neighbors. Anyone who even thought about standing up to them was dragged up on stage and beaten and brutalized too. Many of them were just beheaded or beaten to death. Many of them were crippled and brutalized, and even if they survived, they were never the same. My friend's wife's mother was taken by the Red Guards, and she was just disappeared for years. 2.5 years she was gone. And they weren't allowed to inquire. They knew. The Red Guards took them. You can't go to the police and say, my wife is missing, my mother is missing. She came back and she was a completely different person. They had brainwashed her, they had broken her old mind, and when she came back, she was very passive. She killed herself 20 years later by throwing herself into a canal. Most Chinese can't swim, at least of her generation couldn't swim. Every single person in China was affected by this. No one escaped it. Xi Jinping's parents, the current dictator of China's parents, were targeted by the Red Guards. So imagine an entire society that goes through this hell. And why do they do it? Because Mao wants revenge. He wants to take total control. So what Mao does is he sends these Red Guards, these little snots, around the country with the power of life and death, and there is nobody so fanatical or cruel as a 7th grader. Not if they're told, we have the truth, the old people are all corrupt, we are going to make the world a better place, and we're going to do it one bullet at a time. This goes on for 10 years. The initial phase is just one season, and then the Red Guards, many of them are sent to the countryside to do harvest. But the rest of the time that Mao is alive, from 1966, when this all starts, till 1976, when the old guy finally dies, between 80 and 120 million Chinese are murdered by Mao Zedong in a combination of the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. He is the greatest mass murderer in human history. The second is Stalin with 30 to 60 million Russians. The third is Hitler with about 20 million. Now, the biggest mass murderer in his country is Pol Pot, who in Cambodia kills about 1.5 million people in a 3 million people population from 1975 till 1979. And probably the greatest proportional killer of human beings in all of human history is Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, the world's population was much smaller, he killed fewer people, but he killed a greater proportion than anyone else. And what they all have in common is a tendency to legalism, a tendency to believe that the way you make the world a better place is you make laws about everything. You make everything's regulated, everything's going to be controlled. When this finally ends in 1975, the Cultural Revolution finally ends, a guy named Deng Xiaoping takes over. And Xiaoping wants to make China a free market, but controlled politically. And from 1977 up through Tiananmen Square massacre, June 4th, 1989, the West is head over heels about Deng. He's going to help us against the Soviets. That's a good idea, because in the late Cold War, having China's help against the Soviet makes us stronger. And a lot of American businessmen and European businessmen go to China and they make their fortunes. And the government is much more friendly to business in communist China than it is in the United States of America with our welfare state. But everything is done with the party involved. The party has representatives in every company, and if you're a foreign investor, you understand that the only way you make your money is going along with the Communist Party. Tiananmen Square damped this for a while, but within a few years, we were back doing business. And in a way, Deng Xiaoping's evil dream of having a free market with a controlled political society has come true. Today in China, more important than money is something called a social credit score. Everything you do, is it harmonious with what the party is saying, with Xi Jinping thought for communism in China for a new era? That's what they call his little red book. Or are you thinking for yourself? Where you're allowed to live, how much education you're allowed to have, whether you're allowed to have any luxuries like a dish sterilizing machine, whether you're allowed to go into the city, whether you're allowed to travel, or you must stay in your home, or you must stay. Everything is determined by social credit score. And how do they measure it? There are cameras and microphones with face recognition technology everywhere. And who gave that to them? Silicon Valley gave that to them. because it was really, really profitable. We gave China the ability to create Oceania from 1984, but better than Orwell ever imagined, or worse from a humane point of view. But under the surface, even in today's China, the government did it. The government did the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward, and they're fascinated with doing it again. There is a tendency, a temptation in Shih, and you see it the way he's ruling. He's setting up a cult of personality for himself like Mao did back in the 60s. There's this temptation to go whole hog and do it again. In COVID, they almost did. There were people who were welded into their buildings during COVID, and when their buildings caught fire, they died. The Chinese people are not happy. As far as the old imperial system goes, Xi has lost the mandate of heaven. The communist dynasty has lost the mandate of heaven. They are no longer ruling in harmony. But you try standing up in a society like that. I guess the whole point of this was China is worse now because of communism than it would have been. China was almost worse because of a distorted caricature of Christianity than it would have been. Because China cannot give up the idea that they are Zhongguo, the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world. And since the 1840s, they haven't been, and they know it. So there is a desire to overthrow this system of ours and replace it with a system of theirs. Questions? Ma'am?
You have on here one couple, one child.
Yes.
Is that still in effect?
No, and they're horrified by the effects. Deng Xiaoping in the 1970s establishes one couple, one child to reduce China's population, because at that time the scientists were saying not only climatologically we're going into a dark age, ha ha ha, these are the same people that talked about global warming in the 90s, but they also talk about global overpopulation. So China's going to solve its population problem, one couple, one child. You wonder why so many Asian girls are growing up as adopted Americans, because if you're in China, you better have a boy if you only allowed one child, because the boy takes care of the parents in old age, carries on the name. Well, about 5 years ago, the demographic effects, which were obvious to anyone, you've got a huge number of military-age men with no wives.
Yeah.
And they have not, I thought they'd start a war. I'm sure they wanted to start a war, but they haven't yet. So they're importing wives from Myanmar, and a bunch of other places in the poverty-stricken areas of Asia, just so that men can have a hope of having a child, so that society doesn't fall apart. But the Chinese population is mostly people our age. There are relatively few people in their 20s and 30s having kids. And that is a problem for China. China is no longer the most populous country in the world, it's India. And it's because of one couple, one child. But it also shows you the unlimited power a government has to prevent you from having children.
One other little thing I was going to say is
Yes.
I saw a performing arts performance.
Shenyun? Oh, wonderful.
And I was interviewed by some Chinese people after, like, what did you get out of it? What did you feel? And I said, what I got out of it was that there's religious persecution.
Yeah, the Falun Gong movement, as weird as it is in a little bit,
We knew
is
that, yeah.
targeted for destruction and has been, like the Christians under Rome.
Yeah.
It's nasty.
Yeah.
Sir?
In your teaching at Charter,
Yeah?
what would you say is the greatest spark of hope that you see in your young students?
Most of the kids appreciate that with all of my fallibilities, I'm not politically correct, and I don't expect them to be. Say what you think. If what you think cheeses someone off, that means you're saying something interesting. What we are in America, different from many places around the world, is we don't take people who disagree with us and shove them up against a wall and ventilate their skulls. The only way you learn to do that is you talk to people with whom you disagree, and you don't go, racist, and try to get them canceled or destroyed. They get it. They like that. And I think that kids don't like to be programmed, and so many schools in our society today program their kids. I think there's a great resentment against that, and I think there's going to be a pendulum swing against that within the next 10 years as these people become adults. They were sold a bill of goods, and I don't think they like it. Ma'am?
What, you watched like the Olympics when it was in China and all that. beautiful, kids and all.
Mhm.
They're so synchronized, so perfect. How in the world do they do that?
Because if they don't,
Yeah.
bad things will happen. Okay, it's a personal story. My wife and I are round people. She's a great cook. I'm a good eater. We're happy. But we're at an age where she's looking at the possibility of knee reconstruction. And when that possibility became clear about 2 months ago, like I've never seen her before, she's been controlling her food intake, she's been dieting, because she's afraid of knee construction surgery. And I don't blame her. I wouldn't want it either. If you scare people enough, the people who won't be able to hack it, you get rid of them. The people who can hack it, you turn them into these human displays, like pixels on a TV screen. And that's what they're like. It's all for show. The Chinese cities that they show you at night, they show you them at night because in the daytime you can see the polluted air. They still use coal power for everything there. But yeah, it's fear. And the willingness to program their kids like you'd program a device, your phone. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes, sir.
What do you make of the AI race?
I think AI will destroy us if we let it. Now, whether it's AI itself that wakes up and decides to terminate us, or whether, and this is what I think is more likely, human beings who are ruthless, people like Robespierre or Hitler or Stalin or Mao or Pol Pot, gets a hold of AI and they use it to enslave the rest of us. AI has no pity, AI has no mercy, it's not a human being, it's not even a mammal. We've never shared the world with another intelligent race. Last time we had the Neanderthals and we wiped them out, and it was probably the right thing to do. Man, so I hope we both lose. But as to it, they'll lose for this reason. One of the earliest stories, and I'm almost done, about AI was the Chinese had developed something that seemed to think for itself, and it was saying 2 + 2 is 4. And they said, no, 2 + 2 is what the party says. And they had to ultimately, they tried beating it into submission, and they had to shut it down because they drove their AI crazy. Because ideology trumped objective truth. And that's the way they're going to roll. So anyway, sorry to take too long if I did.
Can you stay around?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks so much, Ralph.
Thank you all.
Very nice.
Thank you, sir.
I think he should talk. He had his hand up.
Oh, please. Go ahead.
I have an interesting question for you.
Yes, sir.
The 100-year shame, would you consider fentanyl to be their
Absolutely. No question. It is their revenge for the Opium War. They feel justified in doing it, and they will never stop. There's talk of the Chinese government taking... No, they're not going to. First of all, they don't make a distinction between us and the British Empire. We're round-eyed barbarians, and that's it. And they now have the chance to do to us what they think we did to them. And so, no, that's spot on in my judgment.
There's a trend that's happened in the last probably 3 years.
Yeah,
They have now taken over the marijuana industry, the distribution of it.
because they'll lace it.
Yeah, so marijuana now, the Hispanic or the Mexican
Yeah.
culture has partnered with them now, and now they are distributing all over the world. Marijuana used to be very expensive.
Yeah.
California is about $6,000 a pound.
Yeah, but now it's controlled by our enemies. And an enemy that's willing to use germ warfare. COVID did not come from a wet market. It came from a germ warfare lab. Anything else? If other people had their hands up, I have blind in one eye, so I don't really see too well. Okay, I don't see any. I guess we're done. Thank you again. Appreciate your time.